Today, we're piecing together a massively destabilizing event from last year with a view to understanding how it affects next year. So who could forget images like this? The storming of Capitol Hill on January 6th, 2021. Supporters of the outgoing President Donald Trump in Washington, D.C., gathering, marching, rioting. They forced their way into the halls of power, trying to prevent the transfer of power from Trump to Joe Biden. People died that day and in the days and weeks that followed. Some were Trump supporters, others were police officers. The event so traumatizing, two took their own lives. But the purpose of today isn't to dissect that day. What I want to do is tease apart the investigation into that attack. So the January 6th hearings, a U.S. committee tasked with explaining and understanding what happened. And now, a year and a half after the committee was formed, it's set to present its final report.
Donald Trump, the President of the United States, spurred a mob of domestic enemies of the Constitution to march down the Capitol. January 6th was the culmination of an attempted coup.
Tonight, you will see never-before-seen footage of the brutal attack on our Capitol. An attack that unfolded while a few blocks away, President Trump sat watching television in the dining room next to the Oval Office.
Who screams? Our screams! We have a breach of the Capitol! Breach of the Capitol!
I was slipping in people's blood. I was catching people as they fell. It was carnage. It was chaos.
Pressuring public servants into betraying their oaths was a fundamental part of the playbook. And a handful of election officials in several key states stood between Donald Trump and the upending of American democracy.
All I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
The president's entreaties became more urgent. He became more adamant that we weren't doing our job. We need to step up and do our job. And he had this arsenal of allegations.
In the days before January 6th and on January 6th itself, President Trump expressed to multiple White House aides that he wanted to go to the Capitol after his speech.
The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel. Mr. Engel grabbed his arm, said, "Sir, you need to take your hand off the steering wheel. We're going back to the West Wing. We're not going to the Capitol." Mr. Trump then used his free hand to lunge towards Bobby Engel. And when Mr. Renato had recounted this story to me, he had motioned towards his clavicles.
President Trump finally gave in and went out to the Rose Garden at 4:03. His staff had prepared a script for him to read. The script said, quote, "I'm asking you to leave the Capitol region now and go home in a peaceful way." The president was urged to stick to this script, but he spoke off the cuff.
"I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election, and everyone knows it, especially the other side. But you have to go home now."
Can a president who is willing to make the choices Donald Trump made during the violence of January 6th ever be trusted with any position of authority in our great nation again?
Mounting evidence before January 6th predicted violence, and not just violence generally, but violence directed at the Capitol. Their plan is to literally kill people. Please, please take this tip seriously and investigate further.
Members of Congress and other government officials stepped into the gigantic leadership void created by the president's chilling and studied passivity that day.
Apparently everybody on the floor is putting on tear gas masks to prepare for a breach. Well, I'm trying to get more information. They're putting on their tear gas masks.
I'm going to call up the effing Secretary of DOD. We have some senators who are still in their hideaways. They need massive personnel now. Can you get the Maryland National Guard to come too?
Hi, Governor. This is Nancy. Governor, I don't know if you have been approached about the Virginia National Guard.
We are obligated to seek answers directly from the man who set this all in motion. I am offering this resolution that the committee direct the chairman to issue a subpoena for relevant documents and testimony under oath from Donald John Trump.
Now, just before I bring in some backup to help us figure out where all of that lands us, I want you to understand the scale of this investigation. So, the committee gathered about 1,000 witnesses. Everyone from low-level staffers to rioters to Trump's inner circle, all interviewed. 140,000. That's how many documents were gathered for this investigation. And all of that led to this, 18 million. That's how many viewers tuned in to watch the last hearing, presented as the committee's big finale. It was a real televised event. And then finally, on Monday, 4. So the committee is recommending criminal charges for Trump based on 4 statutes. Conspiracy to defraud the United States, obstruction of an official proceeding of Congress, conspiracy to make a false statement, and insurrection. But what does all of that mean? Well, we've brought Aaron Blake here to talk about all of that with us. He's a senior political reporter writing for The Fix at The Washington Post. Hey, Aaron, how you doing?
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So can we start with these referrals and what they actually mean? Because, they're not criminal charges, right?
Yeah, so there's a contrarian school of thought. We journalists are often pretty contrarian, that basically these criminal referrals mean nothing. The Justice Department doesn't even have to respond to these, much less do anything about them. They don't have to prosecute just because Congress says that they should prosecute the former president based upon these findings. I do think it's significant, though. It's historically significant because we haven't seen a former president referred for criminal charges to the Justice Department. I also think in certain ways it applies some pressure upon the Justice Department because there is extensive evidence laid out very publicly in a way that the Justice Department would never do short of a prosecution. And so all this information is out there. The Justice Department has this information. A panel that has mostly Democrats, but a couple of Republicans recommended that the charges be brought. And that's significant. And so we're not going to know for a little while what the Justice Department does with that. But this is a significant moment in recent American history, for sure.
Right. And I take your point that we don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to ask you anyway, because I'm wondering how solid the evidence is, right? Like would the Justice Department look at the same set of facts as laid out by Congress? And is it likely to come to the same conclusion, or might they look at it and just come to a completely different set of thoughts?
Yeah, I think what the committee did here was it essentially gave the Justice Department a number of options that it could pursue. So there are basically 4 crimes that it laid out that it referenced the president potentially violating. One of them related to incitement. Another had to do with basically his negligence as this was taking place. The plot to obstruct an official proceeding is what the law is called. Basically, Trump corruptly trying to overturn the election on January 6th. This is a law that has been used against a number of Capitol rioters on that day. So there is precedent for this succeeding, legally speaking, at least for those who were in the Capitol that day. Then there's also things like obstruction of justice, making false statements when it came to submitting these slates of alternate electors that could ostensibly be used if the election were to be overturned on January 6th. So there are a number of things that the Justice Department could potentially pursue. We know that it's looking into a number of these things, including the fake electors, including like obstruction of an official proceeding. So it may not be that the Justice Department ultimately chooses all of these things and has a big prosecution of former President Trump. But the committee is clearly teeing it up to choose 1, 2, maybe 3 of these things and hoping that it ultimately does that. Now, whether the evidence is sufficient for that is another question. I think the one that's been focused mostly on is obstruction of an official proceeding. And so the committee has focused on, number one, showing that people around Donald Trump told him that his voter fraud theories were false. The idea that people around him knew what they were doing was illegal, and the idea that Donald Trump pressed forward with all of this with that knowledge. And so I think maybe that's the key one to watch here, is that obstruction of an official proceeding.
From a legal standpoint, Aaron, how does any or all of this affect Trump's ability to run in 2024?
It's a really good question. What we have seen in recent months is a significant decline in his standing nationally. His approval rating in the Republican Party hasn't dropped, but it has. The number of people who actually want him to be their party's nominee in 2024 has dropped. At the same time, we've seen Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' stock rising significantly. I think there is a real question about how much that owes to the January 6th investigation versus any number of other things that are swirling around the former president. Certainly his taking of documents, highly sensitive documents, classified documents from the White House after he left is a significant liability. But mostly I think it all kind of comes together to tell the Republican Party, look, if you are going to nominate this guy again, not only is it a guy who lost re-election a couple years ago, but it's a guy who has many things hanging over his head, could potentially face a criminal prosecution. And a lot of Republicans seem to be making the decision that they'd rather go with somebody who has a lot of the same policies, likes to mix it up with the left in the same way that Donald Trump does, but doesn't necessarily have those same liabilities hanging over him, doesn't necessarily have that loss 2 years ago that Donald Trump has. And so I think it kind of all combines to create that dynamic, which is really pretty novel in American politics in the last 6 years.
So Aaron, I've got just about a minute and a half left with you. What is it that you're looking for when the report does actually come out? Because that's the key here, right? It hasn't actually come out for us to read.
Yeah, so we'll get the full report on Wednesday. We did get an introductory summary on Monday. That introductory summary didn't include a ton of new detail. A lot of it was pretty incremental, reinforcing things that the committee has shown before through its evidence. And so I'm not necessarily thinking there are going to be a ton of bombshells in this report on Wednesday. I think they probably would have launched those when they were referring the president for the Justice Department. But the way that the committee combines its case, the way it assembles it and makes the arguments, some of the finer details when it comes to the credibility of certain witnesses like Cassidy Hutchinson, who was the really big witness during this process, all of that is going to tell us more about the committee's work and how well it's proven its case. And so that's why I think this report on Wednesday, while maybe it won't be terribly surprising, is going to fill out a lot of the picture here and allow us to draw some conclusions about just what the committee has found and how conclusively it has proven its case.
And yet at the same time, I suppose, hoping that there will be some kind of legal resolution to all of this before 2024 and the presidential election, that's probably out of the question, right?
Well, I think there is a special counsel appointed now, and it could be something where there is some impetus to get this decided earlier than later, given that the former president is running for re-election.
Sure.
But these things do take time. It take a very long time, and so you never know. The wheels of justice turn slowly, and we'll just have to stand by and wait.
Aaron Blake, wonderful to chat with you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Andrew.